sometime. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's really great to be here with all of you and have the opportunity to add my voice in opposition to this unneeded, unlawful, and dangerous set of pipelines. Now, while I live here inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C., my connection to Virginia and to various areas impacted by these pipelines is strong, and a personal connection as well. I've lived in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I first fell in love with the beauty of the land of the state of Virginia. And I also consider Yogaville in Buckingham County, Virginia, to be my home. I am appalled by the threat that the Atlantic Coast Pipeline presents to everything in its path, and I feel it especially as it pertains to the Yogaville community and to the community in Union Hill, including people like Ella and her sister and others. Now, in my work here in DC, I focus, among other issues, on changing the federal policy at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC. That policy is helping to fuel the overbuilding of gas pipelines. But my work hasn't always been that way. I just want to say, in further connection to my work here, a little bit about my background. After living in Charlottesville and graduating from law school at the University of Virginia, I came here inside the Beltway and began what would become later nearly 20 years of practice handling utility-related cases in corporate law firms, where I practiced energy law. But then something changed. I began practicing yoga, and its deeper teachings really resonated with me. I began seeing the world differently and realizing our interconnectedness, the yogic concept that what we do is not unconnected from others, and that we do not exist in isolation from others or from nature. The concept of what I do or what I fail to do impacts everything else, and vice versa. Or, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would say, we are caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality and tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly, impacts others indirectly. And so, I began reflecting on this. Given this principle of interconnectedness, what did it mean for me? What did it mean for me as a corporate lawyer practicing energy law during an era of climate change? I didn't want to keep perpetuating the system through my work. I didn't want to be perpetuating an energy system that contributes to climate change and all the dangers that it brings, that we know so much about now. So I committed at that time to work on both the environmental and the energy side of the equation, and everything changed. I joined the Keystone Pipeline protests at the White House and got arrested with over 1,000 other people. I became trained as a climate reality leader through Vice President Gore's Climate Reality Leadership Program. I became a fellow in the Green Faith Fellowship Program for the religiously based environmental leadership, and ultimately I left the big corporate law firm practice, and now I work for an environmental organization. I don't need to tell anyone else here about all the dangers of these pipelines, about why they're environmentally unsound, about why they are environmentally unjust. You've heard from so many others here tonight about the dangers of the pipelines and about the dangers of the massive industrial compressor stations and what that would bring to the people and to the land along the path. So I won't talk much also about the litigation concerning the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline that's ongoing, or the efforts at FERC to enforce those great court orders that Jonathan mentioned that have invalidated various of the many different federal permits that they've gotten. But I do have to say that those were great court wins, and we should celebrate each and every victory that we get. So hats off to those people. What I really want to do is instead touch base on just a little bit the case for why these pipelines are economically unsound. So much here inside the Beltway, we get caught up in the economics of things, the cost-benefit analyses and all of that. And I want to just kind of put to bed the myth, as I know that you all know, but the myth that these pipelines are needed from a market and an energy demand perspective. And then I'll end by talking just a little bit about why the pipelines affect all of us, no matter where we live and what we can do about it. So FERC's outdated and flawed pipeline review policy is fueling the overbuilding of gas pipelines. Since 1999, when FERC adopted its current review policy, FERC has reviewed over 400 pipeline proposals, including the ACP and including the MVP. But out of over 400 pipeline proposals, it has rejected only 2. In 1999, and 20 years ago when they first put this policy into place, coal was still king. The Google search engine was new. Americans were at that time voracious consumers of energy, and climate change was not yet a common term. But we know that much has changed since then. Now, nearly 20 years later, the transition to a cleaner energy system is well underway, and the cost of renewable energy sources, such as solar and wind energy, continues to plummet. Today, energy efficiency, our more efficient use of energy, has reduced the demand for energy. And today, the reality and danger of climate change is well known. So many pipelines have already been built under the current federal policy that we now have a surplus of pipelines. And just a few years ago, the U.S. Department of Energy issued a study finding that the average gas pipeline utilization rate was only 54%. So we don't need all these pipelines, not from any perspective, not from a perspective of justice, not from an environmental perspective, not from an economic perspective. And I believe that this policy of showing pipeline need by using the sweetheart deals that underlie these pipeline projects is really flawed. In it's a situation where, like as in the ACP and MVP situation, the seller and the buyer of the pipeline capacity are the same. So we have a situation in Virginia where Dominion is affiliated with the ACP. So the ACP, the pipeline developer, is in essence both the buyer and the seller of the pipeline's capacity, and that is not true market demand. Under a long-term 20-year transportation pipeline agreement that Dominion has entered into with the ACP, Dominion's utility customers are the ones who will pay the billions of dollars for the pipeline's capacity, regardless of whether the pipeline's capacity is even used. It's a great deal for the companies, because the FERC also allows the developer to get a very lucrative return on their investment, 14%, which is well in excess of what normally you would receive as a return on any sort of utility asset. So Dominion and their shareholders will be scooping up these excess profits while Dominion ratepayers will pay the cost through their utility bills. Dominion has said that it needs the pipeline, the ACP pipeline, to supply gas to gas-fired plants in Virginia and North Carolina. But the fact is, and facts do matter, the fact is that the major gas-fired power plants that have been proposed in Virginia have all been canceled. And the fact is that many of the plants in North Carolina have also been canceled. So what are these pipelines needed for? The answer is that they are not needed, except to meet the desire of big corporations to make big profits, which would happen at the expense of the people who pay their utility bills, which would happen at the expense of the environment on which we all depend, and which would happen at the expense of our health and our well-being. Because of the growing use of clean energy resources and their cost competitiveness with fossil fuels, and because of our understanding, again, of climate change and what we need to do about it, across the country, we are seeing that gas-fired power plants are beginning to fall out of favor. And as just one example, we can look at the state of Arizona, where the state now has placed a moratorium on the construction of new gas-fired plants. Or in Minnesota, where a utility proposal to build a new plant was rejected because the company had not given enough thought to clean energy options. California is another of the many states that's moving away from the gas-fired plants. A recent study from the Rocky Mountain Institute underscores this trend and shows that renewable energy is causing gas-fired power plants to be financially uncompetitive, and that those power plants and the pipelines that would carry the gas to supply them are at risk of becoming stranded assets or unused assets. It shows that 112 billion of gas-fired power plants currently proposed or under construction along with 32 billion of proposed gas pipelines to serve those power plants, are absolutely at risk already of becoming stranded assets. So, the ACP and the MVP are not needed, despite what the companies say, despite what FERC says, and the fact is that the case for them is economically unsound. These unneeded pipelines and the dangerous pollution and other harms that they would bring, if they were to be brought to fruition, would impact not just the people and places along the pipeline routes. We know also that the pipelines also fuel climate change, and that climate change is a global problem which respects no boundaries. We know that gas is not clean, despite what the industry propaganda machine says, despite all the wonderful commercials that they show saying that gas is so clean. We know this is not so, because methane leaks from all parts of the gas infrastructure, including pipelines and compressor stations. And methane is even more dangerous than carbon dioxide, because it traps so much more heat in the atmosphere. Gas is not a bridge to some sort of happy, brighter future of more renewable energy. It is a dirty, polluting fossil fuel that will take us backward and that will undo the progress that's already been made in the fight against global warming. These pipelines are not just about the people in their path, that would be in their path. The pipelines are about the entire state of Virginia, as well as the other states that they would pass through. And when Governor Northam or his administration acts in support of these pipelines, he is doing so in the names of the citizens of Virginia. He is representing the people of the Commonwealth. Is this what we want Virginia to stand for?
No.
Is this who Virginia is?
No.
Then we need to send a message to the governor that you will not act in our names.
Right.
The pipeline is also about our country. It's in a time now, as we know, when truth is not respected, in a time when all forms of inequity are on the rise. And these pipelines would be just yet another manifestation of these negative conditions. We have to take our country back. These pipelines are also about who we are and why we're here on the planet. I believe, and as yogic teachings teach, I believe that we are all here. We are all interconnected, that we, all people and all things, are interconnected, and that we should act accordingly. And I also believe that acting on that realization is what love really is. I can't really be in a church and not mention love, because I think that's what it all comes down to. And you know, they say that Virginia is for lovers. I agree. Virginia is for lovers of the earth. Virginia is for lovers of the people, for lovers of justice. Virginia is for lovers of clean energy. Virginia is not for lovers of unneeded, dangerous, polluting pipelines. That's not who Virginians are.
Amen.
So just to close, Virginians now can tell the governor, and we all can tell the governor, not in our name. We can all tell the governor to listen to the recommendations of its own advisory council on environmental justice that Jonathan spoke of. Please use your power to stop these pipelines. Governor Northam, you have the power to do this. And I think in your heart of hearts, you know that this is the right thing to do. The courts matter. The state and federal agencies matter for sure. But the court of public opinion also matters. So let us speak up. At the public hearing on the September 11th, let us file comments so that our voices can be heard there and elsewhere. Let us contact our lawmakers. Let us take actions. And let us use our power, our voices, to effect change. As Alice Walker has said, the most common way that people give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any. But we know we have the power. Let us use it. Because if we do, and we can, and we will defeat these pipelines.